Coming up on this week's episode of Standing While Black.
The stories specifically in Star Wars speak to a conflictedness of good and evil, not necessarily a dichotomy within or between people, between good and evil, but this kind of mix in which forces are going to win out.
This is Standing While Black, a weekly podcast discussing Black experiences in fandom. I'm your host, Ashley Briggs, and thank you for checking out the show. On May 25th, 1977, the first Star Wars film premiered in theaters and started a fandom that has continued across generations, regions, cultures, and languages, much like its interplanetary storylines. However, the diversity and inclusivity of this beloved franchise isn't always celebrated within its own fandom. Can stories of fighting for justice in galaxies far, far away make a positive impact right here on Earth? This week, I spoke with Christian Dashiell, a longtime Star Wars fan, as well as a writer, podcaster, and agent for change. In addition to talking about his journey with this film series, we did discuss Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. So, spoiler alert if you haven't watched it yet. You can find articles by Christian at fatherly.com and be sure to check out his podcast, Richmond Til We Die, a Ted Lasso podcast at tedlassopod.com and anywhere you stream your podcasts. I hope you enjoy our chat about representation and the evolution of a fandom. Let's get into it. Okay, so let's start out with a quick icebreaker question we can both answer. Okay, this is a would you rather question.
Oh,
Are
man.
You ready?
Yes.
Nothing too dangerous or scary. Promise. The question is, if you had a choice, what would you choose? Your options are to be the star player on a losing team, or would you rather ride the bench on a winning team?
I probably deep in my heart would rather be the star player on a losing team. I think the only thing that would be different for me is if it was like college sports, then I'd probably rather ride the bench on a winning team because your quality of life is way better. Like you get the better planes and the better hotels. But if all of like that stuff was equal, then I would probably deep down selfishly want all that glory.
That's awesome. I like that. The real answer. That's what the world needs. We need real.
Yes.
That's great. I feel like I would also choose the star player. Now I was trying to be nice about it. You know, I like attention, but I would also hopefully try to take time to uplift the other players. You got to have at least one star to help everyone else out. But if we're all losing and all losers, then we get nowhere. So I feel like I would try to spread the wealth, but I would definitely want to be doing well. I like positive feedback. I like to win. So I would make the same choice.
You want to be a good person on a bad team.
Yeah. I would try to help my teammates and coach, probably, whoever this coach is, they're doing a bad job. So we got to mix up the talent and kind of teach each other. A sense of community as well.
That's very big of you.
I try. I'm not athletic at all. So I would actually, if I'm the star player, then that team is doomed. So in either scenario, there's a problem.
Yep.
All right. Now, I wanted to ask, I saw when you did the questionnaire, which I appreciate you filling out. A few people said it was a little long, and I'm literally trying to make it longer because I have so many questions. But you did mention being a Star Wars fan. Could you tell me a little bit about your introduction to the franchise, or maybe the first time you watched it, or anything that stands out in your memory as far as your first fandom experience goes?
I don't particularly remember an introduction. I was born in 1980, which was kind of the height of Star Wars ascension. It was just ubiquitous around everywhere. One clear memory I have when I was little, there was a movie theater just about a block from our house, and they had kind of that first vector art Star Wars video game, and it was the version where you could sit in the cockpit at a very young age. I remember always wanting to go down there and play that and sit in it, even if I didn't have any quarters to play it. And my parents were always buying me Star Wars stuff. So I guess in some ways, like, that merchandising cycle worked. There was something about the story and the style that appealed to me. And I'd ask my parents for the toys and they would get me some of the toys. And then I'm just like stuck in for the rest of my life.
Well, that's great. Now, when you think of the franchise as a whole, or those first experiences as a kid watching, did you feel represented in the series overall? In
hindsight, no, but I didn't really realize that at the time. I think growing up, I grew up in a multi-ethnic, multiracial house. And so there were some times when I could tell, like, deep down that things were different or important. I remember one of the ways that our family kind of oriented our family life was we as kids got to stay up late on Thursday nights because there was a show which I won't like throw the name out there because it can be triggering for people, but just a really influential show like in the 1980s. And we were allowed to stay up late to watch that because it was one of the few shows that had representation of Black people and of professional Black people and of family life. But I don't remember it bothering me that Star Wars didn't have that representation back then.
So at the time, it was just, did it feel just like every other kind of media where as Black kids, our job is kind of to put ourselves in the character's shoes as opposed to that media that we're consuming actually taking us into account and putting characters in for us. We kind of have to do the work to imagine that we fit, even if we don't see ourselves. Did you ever feel like you had to do a little extra work to relate to these characters?
Not so much in Star Wars, which part of that I think is because there was a different universe, just like an entirely fabricated, made up thing. I do remember, however, being drawn to other things because they did have a representation that wasn't there otherwise. And so I remember really enjoying like Fat Albert. I remember, I think one of the reasons that I liked, NBA basketball, in addition to being from Portland, Oregon, where the only pro sports team was an NBA team, but was just the sense that it felt like something cultural was going on there, especially as I got older in the early and mid and late 90s, and just kind of trying to find things. And it was hard to find them, especially for a family that didn't have cable TV. There weren't a lot of options. So you were searching, seeking, trying to fit in where there was just a little bit of representation. And then I just think like sort of an acceptance that the representation wasn't going to be there at that time.
I see. Yeah, that kind of taking what we get
right,
and making it work.
And it's different, for my kids now, because we as parents don't have to work quite as hard to find representation for them, and they don't have to quite work as hard to then find it for themselves. I would think that growing up now, you would be more bothered if you saw places where you weren't represented, if that makes sense, because there's something to compare it to. Whereas in the 80s, there wasn't that quite as much. And so while my parents did work really hard to find my sister dark-skinned, complected dolls, and they did work, to give us space to enjoy what media was there wasn't enough where I was like choosing or feeling left out necessarily at that age.
That makes sense. Do you think just overall in your upbringing, did you feel embraced by the Star Wars fandom, which I know has changed and evolved over the decades? Did you feel like it was okay to be a part of that fandom, or did you feel because of these issues of lack of representation, did you feel at home within that fandom, or did you feel different on top of being Black kids in America? Did you have was there any, I guess, internalized tension there as far as this series being meant for a kid like you versus other kids? I don't know if that even makes sense. I hope that makes sense.
It does, yeah. I did feel accepted, and I felt as though, I guess a better way to put it is, I always felt like my enthusiasm for the franchise was accepted by everybody else as normal, quote unquote normal. I think you mentioned that just the fandom has evolved. It does appear to be a lot harder now to be a person of color and feel fully embraced by the fandom, especially the online fandom. As the series and as the movies have gotten more diverse, the reaction to that has been a lot more racism, a lot more misogyny within the community. And I kind of, I guess, just lost interest with the online community at some point in time. It seemed like up until those prequels, in the 2000s, you really had to go online to feel a part of anything that was Star Wars and bigger than yourself. And then once it became popular again and new stuff started being released, I was able to kind of be a fan just within my own peer groups and within my own family. And so I didn't find myself like on those bulletin boards anymore. I didn't find myself going and searching and trying to like glean information or part of that quote unquote Star Wars culture. And now seeing it from the outside and just hearing what it's like in there, it does seem like there are pockets of it that are very difficult to be in if you're a person of color or a woman.
Do you think that, I guess, Disney is doing enough to support Black fans and the Black fan experience with the series? I can understand there have been some shifts in casting, but overall, do you think that the producers are doing enough to try to control the way that the fandom operates and the way that fans treat each other within fan spaces?
So what I've seen is that Disney has worked to increase diversity. There has not been, any kind of uptick in terms of, I think, leadership within the Star Wars universe, both mythical and just like in real life. I guess they did have Samuel L. Jackson in the character of a Jedi leader. So that would have been a leadership shift in those early prequels. But, you haven't had, up until now, we haven't seen a lot of directors who have been like people of color or women. And that stuff is starting to change as they're making a shift more toward television, like cinematic television, and a little bit away from the movie theater. But we have yet to fully see and realize how that's going to work out and how well it's going to be supported past this sort of initial foray. I will say, my wife and I, the last thing that we did before the pandemic was go to Disney World to see all the Star Wars stuff. And there, people of color were represented in the cast that was walking around. You had people of color in various different roles, and so that did feel like a more rich, I guess, experience of Star Wars. In terms of what Disney does with the fandom, I'm not sure there's anything you can really do as a company to control Star Wars fans on the internet. Like that's just that's a tough thing to ask even of a multi-billion-dollar company. I guess what they could do is explicitly have statements that say we support these different representations of humanity, and hate will not have a place here, and they haven't done that yet. So that would be a place where they could just explicitly come out and say that, I suppose.
Yeah, I've seen some of their black background, white text kind of we are against racism statements on their social media, but only with certain cast members, or only backing certain cast members at certain times, but overall being pretty quiet and kind of leaving cast members to fend for themselves against angry fans, which I can't imagine what that's like for them. But I saw that you are a self-proclaimed social justice warrior, and I wanted to ask, when it comes to Star Wars, why does Star Wars still matter when we're talking about representation itself? Why are the stories of Star Wars still important to this day?
Because they're old stories. They're not new stories. And the stories specifically in Star Wars speak to a conflictedness of good and evil, not necessarily a dichotomy within or between people, between good and evil, but this kind of mix in which forces are going to win out. I also think, the idea of people who have been cast out or cast aside or overlooked coming together to do something good, like that is a very beautiful and resonant story. And so you have people who have lost their parents, you have people who otherwise have kind of been not accepted by those around them, and what they do is they figure out how to work together for the greater good. So at its core, those stories, which are stories that have been repeated throughout history, like there's nothing terribly original about it. The representation of that is super helpful, I think, especially for this time and place where we're at now, where what we're trying to do is to empower people who have not had voice before, who have been denied voice in the past, and to say, okay, like in our families, in our society, you are going to have voice and you are going to have power in a way that was denied or not possible before. So there's allegory there, there's metaphor there that can still be teased out, and it can be done so in a fun and adventurous kind of way.
So true. Now I know, I've seen all, I think I have seen all except for maybe one Star Wars film, but I'm not an expert by far, and I'm not asking you to be one either. But I do want to ask, I know there was a bit of backlash with some of the more recent films as far as the definition of a Jedi. Could you give me some of your thoughts as far as your reaction to kind of that switch from a Jedi is more of a thing, a chosen one story versus a story that can be anyone's hero's journey? I think that there's somewhere in there was a divide in the narrative. And did you sense that shift? Did it feel sudden? And what are your thoughts as far as the future of this franchise?
That shift did not feel particularly sudden, but I'm all for an opening up of that definition. When Star Wars came to be in the 70s and 80s, that idea of kind of like top-down leadership, even those Western American ideals, of inherent good or inherent elevation, like those were then sort of baked into the system, so to speak. And so for the end, like one of the things, I guess this is like the part where we say spoiler alert, but one of the things I really appreciated when they finally landed the franchise in this last trilogy was just the voice and the agency that they gave Rey, and that she was able to say, like her, the final statement, the way the movie essentially closes is, "This is who I am." And she got to choose that. And that's different. And that's really important. And I think that's something that we want our young people to see and hear. And that's something that we want to model for them as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm really, really into seeing Rey being both powerful, but then still having emotion and making choice, having that agency. And my son, he just turned 5, and he's just now starting to get into Star Wars and understand what's going on. And I love that he gets his first experience of what is a Jedi, for the most part, is seeing a woman. And that is not what I ever would have guessed when I was a kid that my kids would see. So I think that's pretty cool. As change happens, I think it's going in the right direction. I've seen people get upset, but that's just people who can't allow themselves to just go with change, and they don't want to see change and joy and diversity. So I'm glad that they're moving forward and being more inclusive for the next generation.
Yeah, and hopefully, it continues. What you want is to go beyond diversity. And while, representation matters, there's another level to that. And so hopefully, they've signaled that that's what they're interested in doing. That's what they want to do. And, now hopefully there will be some accountability and follow through with that.
Agree. One more question. What overall, just in being a fan of anything, what life lessons have you learned as a fan?
That's a good question. I've learned to be empathetic toward the creative process because it is difficult, especially as you're in the instances that you're making it up as you go along. One of the things that people had a hard time with that I was actually okay with when Disney came and did it was to just say, you know what, like we need to kind of start the canon over just for like the sake and the simplicity of the storytelling so we can have some new linear lines of thought. It would have been good if they, could have, I think, found a way to incorporate some of those old storytellers into the monetization of the new stuff. I would have liked to have seen that just to kind of honor the work and the legacy of the people who had come before them. But it is really hard to tell story. And so with Star Wars and with other things, as I've gotten older and gotten more into creative spaces, I guess just an appreciation of what it takes to create a richness of environment.
Now, you also have a podcast of your own. Do you have one or two?
Currently, I'm involved with one podcast. It's called Richmond Til We Die. It's a Ted Lasso podcast.
Awesome. See, I haven't gotten a chance to check it out yet. Could you tell me a little bit more about your podcast and about the show Ted Lasso?
Yeah, Ted Lasso, I was first introduced to the character 5 years ago. I'm a big soccer fan, and that character was used in some promotional ads when the English Premier League transitioned to NBC Sports. And then last year, the character was released as a TV show. And I didn't give it a lot of time at first because I just didn't see in my head how an ad campaign that I really liked, but that was kind of slapsticky, could have just like the substance and the legs to stand up to 10 episodes. And then started to hear that it was good. And my wife was the one that actually said, like, we should watch this because she had heard about it on some podcast that she listens to. And she's not a sports person. She's not like a sit down and watch TV person. And as we started to watch it, we realized that what the show is, quote unquote, about, like what it says on the label, an American football coach goes over and coaches a professional soccer team. Like that is a vehicle for it to really address deep questions and realities about what it means to be in relationship with each other and what it means to be human and what it means to love and to lose. And it does it in a really surprising and deep way. And so then I had a friend that knew that I really enjoyed the show and I'd watched it twice, and he invited me to do a podcast with him. And then we recruited his wife to be a third host. And we've been having a lot of fun with the project of going through and not really recapping the episodes, but talking about the themes and the allusions and the metaphor and the art that is referenced in all of the episodes. And now we've kind of branched off a little bit and have started also interviewing people to talk about how the show has resonated with their lives, and how they've used it in different things that they're doing. Awesome.
That was my question after that. The follow-up would have been, what inspired you to start the podcast? But you answered that for me. You're a perfect guest. So thank you. Where can we find your podcast?
If you just search Richmond Til We Die on any of your podcasting apps of preference, or if you check us out at tedlassopod.com, you can find links to all of our stuff, as well as very comprehensive show notes and show audio.
Awesome. I've got Got to get on my own show notes because I took a look at your website and I was just like, man, this is a pro. These are real notes right here.
Well, it's a team effort. So Brett, our producer, does a really good job kind of packaging all of our stuff well for public consumption.
So from one producer to another, he's doing great, you guys. It looks great, and enough for me to now want to go and check out the show based on that alone. So you're doing great.
Good old Ted evangelism. That's what we're about.
Great. Well, I hope you continue to spread the word.
We will try. We'll try.
Thank you. One last thing. Do you want to give any shout outs to anyone, or are you promoting anything else that we should know about?
Yeah, we have the podcast going, so if anybody wants to check that out, we would appreciate it. I have writing up on a site called fatherly.com. We're a parenting website, and in the section that I write in, we try to confer with people who are experts in their fields about things that are of interest to parents, about their kids' development and how they interact with their kids, and scholarly studies that are coming out about parenting and child development. So check out anything on the site. There's an entertainment section, and we have our parenting section. There's a science section. There's a news section. And even though it's called fatherly.com, over half of the readers are female. So, there's clearly something that appeals to a broader section of society than the title might suggest.
Awesome. I'll be sure to check it out. Thank you so much for your time, Christian, and please come back to the show. I would love to talk to you again.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, and I can't wait to hear all the other guests that you have this season.
Thank you for listening to Standing While Black, a weekly podcast discussing Black experiences in fandom. Follow this podcast on all of your favorite streaming apps and visit standingwhileblack.com for show notes and to apply to be a guest on the show. This podcast is written, produced, and hosted by me, Ashley Briggs. Show your support and get early access to new episodes by joining the Standing While Black fandom on Patreon. Let's geek out together.